Yeah. So yeah, have a problem and then read literature around it, and then don't accumulate tools, just have a problem.
Yeah.
And then identify the right tools. But in a
Yes.
sense, don't you need to, like, how do you know what the right tools are if you don't have knowledge of the tools? So when I'm, for example, going about my life, I might not know that philosophy is relevant. And so that I've got a problem and I don't know that philosophy can help with that problem. So then I'm not gonna
Right.
learn philosophy. So then
Um,
how do I, this is it's a broad, I don't know if I've got that much of a question, but I'm just trying to grope for a way to think about this. Like, in a sense, I need to study things. Like if I just randomly study physics, I don't have a problem in mind. It's interesting, but there's no problem.
right.
But in a sense, is the approach of just looking for tools with problems in mind a good one?
I think in the context of Musk, he really is talking about like engineering problems in the sense that whether it's programming tools, mathematical tools, like statistical tools that you use once you know the problem. It's not like you learn some equations before you learn what they're good for. Like you would need to, those tools are meaningless without some objective or goal in mind. But I
Yeah.
think that would be a different comparison to say tools of thinking. Those are different kinds of tools. I think that's even goes before this whole do you need like accumulating tools like to actually solve a problem, like the concrete problem. You had the more abstract way of thinking. I don't think he's considering the abstract sense of accumulating tools. In that sense, you might need to, I see the problem you're saying that without even knowing the subject, or maybe you know something is interesting, but you don't know the problems until you even know what you could even use to create a problem. Like what is even the problem in the first place? It's hard to know sometimes.
Right. Or identifying what the right tool is for the problem requires knowledge of the tools available. So for example, if I'm unhappy, I might say, well, to solve my unhappiness, I need X. But then, and so in order to get X, I need the following tools. So like, let's say I need a house or whatever. And okay, houses cost X. So that means I need to develop tools or find tools that will help me get X amount of money. But then I'm not necessarily, but I don't know, like, but then I could say to myself, well, why study philosophy? That's not, doesn't, it's not going to help me for my purpose. But proceeding, just identifying the right tools, you need to even know the tools
Right.
and their properties, right?
Probably yes. Or even what context these tools are part of even. You don't I mean one thing I learned from Aristotle is his approach to what is it? Like just scientific thought. Not necessarily
Yeah.
science as we know it, but science and like the precise analysis and careful analysis and a general process even they follow through his books. Usually you just need you begin with the subject, just know what the subject is, just know what you're talking about it, like know what you're talking about, like it not any precise analysis, just like know what you're talking about, know the context. And I'm saying word context, but Aristotle just always talk about like the subject first, like is it ethics, is it math, is it philosophy? Just have that in mind to know where to place your discussion and thoughts. And from there, he usually goes into discourse or how we normally talk about words, why we normally talk about this subject. Like in, I don't know, physics, you talk about things that fall, things that move. I mean, you can discuss that and analyze that at that level and then in almost a precise way, like we do sometimes when we talk about, well, what did he mean when he said this? What did that person mean when they wrote that sentence? We could just talk about, well, they probably meant this because this is how we understand each other and how we understand the world. But from there, then we can get into like the actual observations. Like, well, now that we've exhausted these general ways of talking about things, now let's look at the world and see how these things work. Do they really work this way, or how does it work out? So in this process, really just knowing your subject and just general sense of how you talk about it. Then you break it apart and see, do you need to observe things? Do you need to analyze things deeper? Things like that. And that's his general process.
I didn't quite follow that. So does he already has the knowledge of the subject? So like, for example, if he's writing about animals, it's because, yeah, and he's viewing it as a certain subject, it's because he's already dissected tons of animals and
Well,
done lots of
I mean, even
classification, or
before that, just knowing this subject is when you would know biology, whether or not you're a biologist, you still know what biology is. I think you say, oh, how do chickens come out of an egg? And that's biology. I mean, you know the subject, you know what you're talking about. It's just the what. It's starting out very simple of your analysis.
but so before though, like assuming, I know roughly what biology is. I haven't studied it, but that's because it's been handed to me as a category. But what if I was just like Aristotle and I'm just trying new things, like researching the stars, and then researching animals and dissecting them? Like at some point, I don't, at the start, it doesn't start as biology. So I'm just trying to get my head around like,
Well,
what does it mean to know that the general, like if I've got some problem, I don't know what the general subject is necessarily to, like if
true.
I'm thinking about hypotheticals, I don't know what the general, I didn't quite get that thing of the general subject, unless you mean in terms of like, I already have the knowledge of the subject and I want to communicate it. And so to keep the context in mind and what I delimit, then I've got to know the
It's
general. Yeah.
it's about the what really. It doesn't need to be subject matter per se. Just the what. They could say the stars in the sky could be the what it's about, what you're doing, what you're thinking about. It's just your
Okay.
object of thought you're thinking about. Just know what you're thinking about. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's just you identify the what. What is it you're talking about that you're
As
thinking about
opposed
even?
to,
As opposed to say like, um, you could just say, oh, I'm looking at trees. Like, I mean, that's almost too vague. Like, what does it mean to look at trees? Like, you're saying you look at trees. Well, I would say to make it more precise, like identify what exactly you're talking about. Trees where you live, trees, how they develop, trees in North America, just like have
so
some
what
way to,
aspect of the thing?
or like the thing or a part of the thing, one of the two. That's how I would generally start personally. And I think that's generally his method. I know Aristotle's a bit about common sense, unfortunately. So it'd be like, oh, it should be obvious what you're talking about. But I think what for your question, it could be a matter of like first just set the context, know what you're talking about, say what you're talking about. Don't just take it for granted. Like say, I'm studying whatever you think it is you're studying, or whatever you want to figure out, or whatever you see it is that you're looking at. And you're talking
Uh,
about like identifying problems, right? That's what you're getting at, right?
yeah. Or identifying tools for problems.
Tools for problems.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you need to know what you're talking about before you even begin to say what the tools might be or what the problems might be. Because I mean, you got to know your subject first, whatever it might be. Like, I mean, subject in the same sense, we say, like, apples are red. What's the subject of the sentence? Apple. Like, the sentence is about apples. It's not any more complicated analysis than that. But you need to identify that that's what you're talking about. That's what you're thinking about. You can go from there.
Okay, but how does this apply to like, so I got to know what I'm talking about, but then let's think of an example. So how would this apply to um, I want to improve my decision making process? Like, what does it mean to know what I'm talking about in that context? And then, I mean, I guess that's a problem or a purpose to solve. So that's one
Yeah.
thing. But then, how does what you're saying apply in that context?
I think that's really just what you explained there is almost the answer to that anyway. I mean, that is one thing that would be enough probably to identify the subject. You might want to say more than just decision making. Well, you're talking about a certain kind of decision making. Can you be more
Right.
precise about that? What exactly is the subject matter we're talking about here? You specify more. And then after that, you can then talk about, like we do sometimes, well, what do people mean sometimes when they say motivation? What does that mean when they say that? Like, what does it mean in common sense parlance? What do people mean when they say that? And can we think about one reality that's talking about what it refers to or examples? Start that way.
And what
Just
about
working with
this what you described with Aristotle's approach to thinking about just studying things for an interest? Like, okay, I'm studying, let's say I'm interested in philosophy. I want to read Nietzsche. I don't know if there's necessarily any practical application to reading Nietzsche,
right.
but I'm interested. So how does it apply to say that? Because in this case, it goes against what these two are saying, which is have a problem to solve. You know, obviously they meant this in a specific context, but let's just take it out and apply it generally. They say have a problem first. So if I applied that, it'd be like, well, I don't have a problem I know Nietzsche can solve, so I'm not going to read him. So how does what you explained with like knowing or Aristotle's approach apply?
Mhm. Well, using his approach, I think we'd want to talk about like, okay, tools for solving problems. It's like the main thing we're really talking about. So what exactly is a tool here? I mean, you can have tools like hammers that you hit it to accomplish a specific thing. We have tools like, say, a programming language. You could say Java is a tool, but it's not like a one thing. There's a range of things you can do with it. It's never a given what you can do with it.
Yeah.
And you could even say there's tools of abstract tools like something kind of thinking. So we can say that there's like concrete tools that physically move things, or you could say there's tools like a process or a system. It's not a thing, but as much as a group of things that accomplish something.
A method.
Yeah. And there's another kind of mental method we
Right.
could say is like abstract tools. So you might want to distinguish between those kinds.
Right.
And Musk seems to be talking about the kind of like either concrete things or systems. Jordan Peterson seems to be kind of getting at the abstract kind. This problem, like what kind of problems are you talking about? I think he's talking about abstract problems. So we can classify things that way. And that sort of thing is something Aristotle does. Like, how do we talk about these things? Oh, we can talk about tools in those ways. You could split it up in that way. It's not like some ultimate conclusion we're coming to, but it's how we're dividing the subject up, how we're thinking about it. We're breaking it down into different sections or parts, understanding what we're talking about before we get at this deeper question you have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds to me like, well, there are a couple of things, and I still didn't quite make sense of all of it, but and most of it. But let's say from what I got just now, it just sounds like what you do in objectivism when you're trying to exercise the virtue of independence, which is to clarify the words you're using and what their use is, what the concept is, does it make sense or not? That it sounds like a Socratic, I guess it's more Socrates, right? It's whatever you call that Socratic method on the question. So it would be, what is a tool? What
I say
in
more
what
Aristotelian, really.
Okay.
Like that is Aristotle's way. I think it's almost like straight Aristotle when Rand talks about that.
Yeah.
I mean, she, in her own way, of course, but it's the same idea, I guess. Clarifying the ideas, breaking it down, understanding what we talk about, then going from there.
So what do you think about both? Let's go with abstract tools then. Like on the one hand, if you just accumulate tools, like you learn methods, you learn sciences, you can forget them through lack of use. But on the other, if I don't research and read new things, then I might not identify that there are suitable tools to solve problems, right? Like I can start perceiving problems that weren't there before, things I can improve.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't know without having pursued the study of something. I wouldn't know that it's a tool and that it's available. it's a kind of I don't know what to make of that, but so do you have any thoughts on that before we,
I think a
you
lot
know,
of the
like I've got it. Okay, I'll
simultaneous.
give you an example. All right. I was thinking like, hey, it would be pretty cool, especially now, to have a door handle that self cleans. Because there's all these, it seems kind of pointless to wash your hands when a lot of people don't, and they just use the
Yeah,
door handle in public
yeah.
places. And but unless you like, I don't even know what it would mean to find the right tools. Like it may require some knowledge of random subjects that I don't even know about. And then so if I haven't, yeah, I don't know. I don't. It's something I'm stuck on. But
The way I think of this is also they might be missing. Well, I think the bigger point is there is some goal in mind that it's something's pulling you there in a way, like metaphorically. Like if your purpose is life, like your actions go towards that end. In a sense, you call it a problem because that's where you're supposed to be going. When that's the kind of thing you could be thinking of. Like know that there is some goal or objective or end that you're going towards. And by that standard, you could have tools like the means to get there. In that sense, yes, you could have, you need that to begin with to then have the tools. But of course, there's some mixing there because not everything's that highly abstracted. Be like, oh, I want to understand. Just want to see what Nietzsche offers. In some sense, no, you won't know what tools you can get out of that until, or you couldn't just learn a list of tools before you even know why to read something. You wouldn't know what to do with it. It's just there
yeah,
being unused and useless. But at the same time, you might need to know those before you even enter a subject because it might just seem like just noise. And what do you do with just noise? Like without tools, it doesn't mean anything. Like you can't do archaeology without digging with a pickaxe first. You need something, the tool first at some point, sometimes to sort through things. But on the other hand, you do need just the feel to even know, well, what is there to think about? Sometimes you do just need to dive into it. And I don't think you could have tools beforehand. But as far as strictly talking about should we accumulate tools without problems in mind? Probably not, because we to have a tool, I think the only way to even remember it, to need it, or have any purpose of it is to have the problem.
right. All right, let's move on because we could.
Yeah.
So I think in somewhere in Gogue Speech, she talks about logic as a process of identifying and making
Yes.
discoveries as all being boiled down to A is A.
Mm.
And what's so as an example, let's say I observe, I'm trying to make a connection in my mind between A is A and just, I don't know, basic things. Like, for example, I observe that water boils on fire. I see it bubble and get hot. And so, okay, what's this? Apart from the fact that I'm saying water is hot, like what, I don't really get what the significance of A is A there. Water is hot. Okay, fire. If I put fire under water, it gets hot. Okay, great. And how does A is A help that much? I'm not. I'm trying to see a connection between this abstraction and actual day to day life.
Well, let me think of the most where this question even comes out of, like why Aristotle even thought he had to say it. I don't know if he said this specifically, but why he had to make something about the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. Like he had to be specific about it. So there's Heraclitus, who said that you can't step in the same river twice
Yeah.
because he thinks everything is changing constantly and nonstop in such a way that you can't say that a thing is what it is because it's constantly changing. It never is what it is. It just becomes always becomes something different every moment, every second. There is no identity to it. It could literally go from one to the other without reason or justification because that's
Right.
all we could ever perceive. Our
Right.
senses can't give us anything else. Or there's Parmenides who said everything is what it is and nothing changes. Everything's permanent, and I forget we justified change, but I think he said something like it's an illusion, or that there's something like that. And he just said there is no change, and so he's just saying identity is so permanent that there's no such thing as change. But Aristotle was motivated, I think, to both explain change, but also to explain that there is an identity to things. And I think Aze was to identify that a thing's nature is what it is. The thing is what it is. That it's not, that we can identify things the way they are. And even if something changes, it doesn't mean that its potential is changing, things like that. It gets really complicated at that point, but really it's just trying to say that there's some stability to the way things are, that things change by nature, things remain the same by nature. So that's an important identification, at least say that things aren't just going randomly, or things are simply permanent and unchanging. You need some way to maintain both. I think that's Aristotle's way of doing so.
Okay, I'm gonna skip that. I'm still not. I don't really get it, but I will come
really
back to it. It was in. I'll have to find you the quote too from the Gogue speech at some point. I'll go through it because there's a lot of. I remember you saying to me, like, people sometimes think she is deductive, like she started from the axioms. Yeah. And I read, when I was reading, I've read Gogue speech like 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
And there is some part in there where she says existence exists in Aze or something, and my entire philosophy is contained in that. So I get why you could assume that it's, but there's a lot in there like this, and I was just I couldn't make connections between it. And
I mean, for now, just think of it that everything is a nature, and everything is that nature, or behaves by its nature. That's all you really need to know for now, really, to keep the main idea down. That's always what it comes down to. A thing acts by its nature, and it changes by its nature.
Okay. So do you know much about mental models?
Yes. Pretty decent idea.
Yeah, I actually found a book written by, I think his name's Gabriel Weinberger. He started DuckDuckGo. And so these are a few that I found elsewhere, but he's got like hundreds in this book, and he just lists them and briefly speaks about them. And I think the term seems like it's pretty loose, right? Like it's not, because
yes,
sometimes these are just concepts or ideas or questions. They're not, I wouldn't really think of it as I don't really know if it's a model. It just seems kind of, like opportunity cost is a concept. I don't really know if that's a model.
I wouldn't say so. I mean, psychology would have a more precise definition. In the general sense, like a way to think about things. I guess you could say anything that's a concept is a mental model. And some people actually think that concepts are really just mental models.
Yeah,
but for our purposes, just like heuristics or mental tools is what I would call these.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're a lot of them are just concepts. Like tragedy of the commons was listed as a mental model, but that's that's a economic concept.
Theory.
Yeah, or
probably a theory actually.
Yeah. And but I guess the broader point, even though it's maybe not so precise in the wording, is that these are concepts that are applicable to a lot of day-to-day situations.
Yes, that sounds fair.
And so I've been going through some of them, trying to find ways to habituate them. And this is, I guess, where the psychology might come in. And I was going to show you a few, which I found them really cool. So like you can break down a decision into what kind of decision is it, and use matrices like a consequentiality, irreversibility, and Eisenhower matrix. Basically, if it's like I'll give you an example. So let's say I'm thinking about a decision and it's consequential and it's irreversible, then that would mean I have to decide slowly and methodically. If it's consequential but reversible, I might decide quickly and collect information. And then, you know, how long should you take to decide? So happiness test might be, I project out a week, a month, a year, and I ask myself, is this likely to have significant impact on my happiness in either the worst or best case outcome of the decision? Sheep in wolf's clothing is like decisions where you want to avoid trying to pass out really small differences in the choices. So for example, you're deciding on a trip between Paris and Greece, and to you they're both like really good, but you're like, which one should I go? You know, you can keep researching infinitely, or you can just ask yourself, if I only had one choice and it was to go to one of these countries, would I be happy? If it's yes, then you decide quickly. Anyway, there's a whole list. And then, you know, for the decision itself, these are all stolen from different places. Like this is Jeff Bezos, for example, and this is Derek Sivers, and there's all these random people. But the point is, these are actually really useful for decision-making processes. And I've been thinking a lot about how to grab all these, we'll call them concepts or questions, but we'll just go mental models to talk about concepts or questions that are useful in day-to-day situations. And taking them from people who are successful in industry, financially, or in another respect, like copying whatever the questions they ask themselves and the way they think, and then trying to habituate it. And so anyway, I've been getting really into that. And one of the things I'm thinking about, and I'm curious if you've got any thoughts on, is like the process of habituating it. So like for me right now, the process of habituating is, as I'm either, if I've got time, most of the time I won't, but if I do, if I'm making a decision, I can manually run it through this gauntlet of questions and questions and concepts. So it'd be like, I've got a journal and I'm like, okay, regret minimization. And then I think about, okay, if I project out 80 years, will I regret having done this or not done this? And then it's very cumbersome for each individual small decision, but that's the process of automating it and then memorizing each one and then trying to manually do it in your head or reflecting at the end of the day. So basically right now, my process for trying to habituate mental methods is journaling and manually going through each one, reflecting on the more significant decisions of the day, for example. I mean, this is just for decision making, but mental models apply across the board for like, you know, how you spend your time. For example, you might factor in opportunity cost as a concept when you spend time. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the process of habituation through journaling and manually sort of, you know, like literally have a list, and it could be a really dumb decision. Like you're deciding between buying this moisturizer and that moisturizer, and then you run it through this mental gauntlet. And that's the process of habituating this automatically. What do you think?
Generally, yes. The problem is the volume. How many? I mean, like, I think there's too much. I mean, I think it should be, I think a better way to go about it is like dividing those up more. Like, I don't think you'd want more than 5 for any particular decision.
Oh,
Like,
okay, you're talking about the crow, right? Oh, interesting.
that's the
I feel
reason. Yes.
like, yeah, actually, that's a good point. That's where philosophy might come in to help you condense some of
Yes.
these, because some of them might be, um, you know, like asymmetric payoff and free roll. I could probably integrate as an example. I haven't told you what they are, but yeah. So okay, so yeah. I mean, that's the question of integrating with philosophy. So 5,
Yes.
trying to narrow down, trying to organize it so there's at most you're holding 5 units for each um, mental model category, if you want to call it that. So
Or
decision making.
or be able to quickly find the 5 you need. Like, if with enough practice, you probably could organize many methods in your head and go to the ones you need and then use those right away. I think that's a possibility, but it needs to be more condensed, I think. Otherwise, I think there's no real point to it. If you want to do just this deep analysis that's 20 pages long, sure, you might want this, but you're not writing a dissertation. You might write something like that about like 20 pages of some obscure philosopher for a dissertation in literature. That happens, but it's not what you're doing here. You're just trying to focus on some particular things to make a decision. It reminds me of something Aristotle also went on about, not necessarily for this purpose, but as a way to solve problems. I would say that, the four causes, which are another way of thinking about answers to the four questions, or four answers, because they're basic things you want the answer to, which is the mechanical cause. Like, say if you open the refrigerator door, that's your hand is, the muscles in your arm are moving the door open. That's what caused it to open. You got the efficient cause, that you as a person went to the refrigerator to pull it open and get out some food. You're the efficient cause. You're the reason this action occurred, the means by which it occurred, not just the door opened by an arm. Or there could be the final cause, like the reason you're even going in to get the food out is to like survive and live and get nutrition. And things like that are ways of just organizing just some four basic questions to explain most phenomena or get a really good explanation. That's for scientific purposes, but that's the sort of thing you'd want. You'd want here. You got like four basic questions, whatever it might be, that guide you on all issues. That's the ideal here. So I see, in a sense, we get that here, but maybe 4 or 5 is a good number. Basic questions, basic frames of questions, things like that. And that's a lot with Aristotle's method. I think Rand does that too. She's always big on like what purpose in your life and what concepts are related. She focuses on that a lot. Like that's how she analyzes. That's how you get into anything, really.
Right. So it sounds, if I wouldn't be surprised if I open this book later and find out that they've listed Aristotle's 4 causes as a mental model. But
yeah, they're very useful. I'll show you a good picture. I have a really good, clear explanation what they are. So you could even use that. I'll show you what I mean here clearly.
And what did I want to ask you? Oh, how does this relate to what you mentioned about Aristotle's 4 causes? How does it relate to proximate and root or root cause? Because I saw there was, in some of the later pages, which I haven't read yet, he talks about proximate and root causes. And I think the it sounds like there's a parallel here, although they've taken just 2 rather than 4. And the root, the proximate would be, for example, a spaceship blows up in space. The proximate cause is the gas cylinder exploded. I don't know. I'm just making this up. I don't know. And then the root cause is people were not paying attention properly to the conditions in space, something like that. That's my understanding. So is there an overlap?
Yeah, I think that would be the gas thing is like efficient cause. I think the other one's a formal cause. I think that's what those are in terms of Aristotle. The spaceship blowing up, that's definitely efficient cause.
Okay.
Like it's the movement of these gases in the spaceship that cause it to blow up. And there's other causes. I think we'd call that formal because it's like the people made it in a state that this could happen, something like that. So I need a better way to think of it, but yes, those would fall into place pretty easily.
One thing that I'm actually not sure on is, okay, so you've got all these questions to ask about a decision. So for example, let me find one that's good. Some of these things don't integrate, but they are really good. Like for example, decision stacking of validation is, if you're, as an example, if you're thinking about, let's say, buying a home, but you've never bought a home before, and instead of like just buying some home, which is a big investment, you might go rent in the house that you want to buy to see what it's like first. And you rent there for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months. And then you decide. That's considered validation. It's like, but that's, that's not, that idea is great. And a lot of people in business use that idea to say, before they start selling a product, they find ways to really cheaply test the market rather than investing some massive amount and it turning into a failure. And them losing a lot, they can find out, okay, this isn't going to sell, and they don't lose that much. And same with the person buying the house. But that doesn't fit into, like, okay, how do you decide what method you use? You decide according to a standard which is flourishing. You want your life to flourish, but there's nothing in that to tell you, like, give you all these tips and strategies, like find ways to cheaply validate your decision making or your choices, for example. And I can't really find a way to integrate that into, it's more like a question than, it's a question that's useful in many contexts, but it's not like a principle. And so it doesn't seem to integrate,
Yeah.
For example, like regret minimization is Jeff Bezos's approach of projecting out 80 years and asking yourself, if I don't do this thing now, will I regret it? It's not a foolproof thing. It's just a useful question, I guess. And yeah, that's the issue. A lot of these things I couldn't. Some I could probably find a way to integrate, but a lot don't seem to really integrate.
Well, maybe we could start by like first saying, are any of these here similar? Can any of these just here be related to each other? Like, oh, they're like each other because, say, mental contrasting might be like, well, I don't know what it might be like.
Mental contrasting might be similar. Well, I mean, pre-mortem and mental contrasting are kind of different. So yeah, I don't know. Mental contrasting is imagining the worst and best case outcome and comparing them like visually. And pre-mortem, which is the only thing I could think of that's maybe got some connection to it, but still no, is that imagining the worst case outcome and figuring out what would have happened to get you to the worst case outcome. If you choose to pursue if you choose to act on a certain choice. So they are quite distinct. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could maybe try to break them down into further categories. Like, menu strategy is this idea of, let's say you've got a decision to make. The first thing you might do is sorting out your alternative choices into categories. For example, determining what's good, what's bad, what qualifies as good, what qualifies as bad before you begin the process of making a decision. So that might be it might be under it might not be an actual process or concept to help you make the decision itself. It might be before that. So it might be like, how should I deal with my alternative? I don't know. There might be another category for it, is what I'm saying. But otherwise, I can't really think of ways to integrate them.
The key and the difficult part, of course, is seeing what way we can categorize these things in a decision-making procedure. Maybe we don't use it as a gauntlet. Maybe we reorganize it based on, well, we see the virtue in doing this. We see the value in doing this, but we can do it better. We can condense it more. We can make it more effective. So maybe we need to reorganize some of it. And I think the how long is a good question to ask. How long do I decide? Like, that's a quick thing to go through with any decision. You can go, but mental model gauntlet, like, maybe it's another way to say it.
They called the time to decide time accuracy calibration trade-off, but it sounded so
wordy.
Yeah, it was such a it just sounded like some geek thing. How long should you take to decide is better? So
in the gauntlet, maybe you could say organizing problems. It's just spitballing here. I don't really know what you
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
use,
I know
but
what you're saying. Yeah, that's what I was getting at with the menu strategy, because it's not so much about picking, it's more about, like if you have I think this was actually taken from a research study as well, and I wrote it down. The menu
sounds about
strategy
right.
is based on research done on, like, if you hand out a menu, people get overwhelmed with choice. But if you
Mhm.
say divide your restaurant menu into vegetarian and everything else, then
Yeah.
it guides people. So it's that based on that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, yeah, anyway. I think also that there is massive, like, this is very popular now, especially since Charlie Munger, who, him and Warren Buffett work together at Berkshire Hathaway, which is like an $80 billion fund, and they've had huge success. And um, Charlie Munger started talking about how he has a lattice work of integrated mental models, and he's got hundreds of them, and he uses them to make his decisions daily and to think daily. And since then, this thing has taken off. There's books on this. Like, I've got one in front of me now, written by the founder of DuckDuckGo. Like I mentioned, it's got hundreds of them. Everyone's become super interested, and I think there's still space to make them more effective, because a lot of people just list them, and they're not very well defined. They're not very well thought out. They're not integrated, and there's probably tons of room for more
Yeah.
philosophical precision, and then combining your knowledge of psychology and figuring out ways to integrate them. I think there's tons of space. I don't know, to run a course on this, for example.
Yeah. That's what I've been working on. Like right now, I've got some general sections of what I talk about, like maybe not categories per se, but like general topics. Like for context, I have the 4 W's and how. Basically, as you define context is always the 4 W's: who, what, where, when, why, how.
Right.
Those are
I
always
remember you
useful.
mentioning that. Yeah, that's from journalism too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
that would qualify according, to most people as a mental model. It's like
yeah,
context. Okay, we take it from journalism. So yeah.
yeah, and same with essentializing. Like I give like 4 primary aspects of essentializing ideas,
Right.
and one category about focus, all about like what is focus, how do we change focus,